Welcome to our session on DataOps Observability, everyone. As Chris mentioned in the panel discussion, we take a little bit of a broader view on what DataOps Observability means versus just data observability. And we'll talk more about it, but specifically what we mean when we say DataOps Observability is really the set of best practices and tools and technologies that data teams need in order to be able to execute the data ops methodology. So that's what we're going to be covering. Instead of doing sort of an academic presentation of what data ops observability is, what we really want to do is just have a discussion. As you probably got a good flavor of from Chris's previous discussion, Chris is in the field with customers every day, sees real world problems, understands, those challenges and then how they ultimately resolve them. So we really just wanted to make it a discussion about kind of what we're seeing in the field. And so with that, let me just quickly introduce myself. Sarah, there we go. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Unravel, and I'm joined by Chris, who you've already met. Chris, you want to say hi?
Sure. So for folks who don't know me, Chris Santiago, I'm the Vice President of Solutions Engineering. Think of me as, boots on the ground, really executing with our customers so that way they can be wildly successful.
Awesome. Okay, so start from the top, right? I mean, data is truly fundamentally changing the world. We see that every day, all around us. We see the kind of innovation driven in things like remote automatic driving cars, in the rapid pace of vaccine development, the way that data has affected the development of agriculture, and so many things in our world. And so really what's happening is every company is becoming a data company, right? And if you think back 10 years ago, we were saying the same thing about every company becoming a software company. And so it's been a bit of a natural evolution then for companies to now recognize that what actually is fueling that innovation is certainly software, but ultimately it's that data that is enabling it and driving the innovation. But here's what we really want to recognize is that while everything I just said is true, the people that really make all of that work are data teams. And so in order for companies to successfully realize the innovation that data can drive for their businesses and for the world, it really comes down to actual people, the folks on the data teams who are responsible for setting up and running and managing these data pipelines and data environments. And having said that, what we see are data teams really struggling. So Chris, you're out there every day. What are some of the things that you see happening with data teams?
Yeah, I am. I mean, I see a lot of data teams. For one, I know there's been a lot of churn and turnover, right? It could be from top level from the company just trying to reduce personnel because of just various situations. But it also is because of just folks just being overworked, overburdened, feeling that they can't keep up, right? And a lot of this is just because, do they have the correct tooling? Do they have the right best practices in place? So yeah, the boots on the ground, I would say that, your common data platform team member is not happy.
So if you think about it, we mentioned every company became a software company 10 years ago, and software development teams had a lot of these same struggles, right? They were operating in silos. The waterfall software development process was too slow. And what they needed to do was implement a set of best practices and technologies that enabled them to run a DevOps methodology. And that resulted in significant gains and improvements in the way that software is developed. So if you think about that, data teams basically need the same thing that software development teams did 10 years ago in implementing DevOps. And DataOps is the answer to that. But if we look at data ops teams and we see that they're struggling the way Chris described, but they're struggling, but yet they're using those same tools that DevOps teams have been using to implement DevOps. So, the question is like, why is that? And the answer is really kind of in the question, right? Why are data ops teams struggling using DevOps tools? And it's just simply DevOps tools were not designed for data ops functions. So, Chris, maybe you could just highlight some of the core differences that are really driving that issue.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you think about the DevOps side of the house, there are very, very great, mature tools that are out there, such as, your Datadogs of the world, Grafana, Prometheus. The challenge with these tools is that, they were very primarily focused in on web apps, right? Tracking, latency across the database. Now, when you try to apply this to modern data stacks like Databricks or Snowflake or Kafka, we're talking about parallel processing here, right? So it's a different vocabulary, different ideologies, different pain points, right? So being able to try to apply the same DevOps tools that used to work for teams, a couple years back, it's not a good fit here on the data teams. And what you find is that while these traditional DevOps tools and observability platforms provide some level of observability, it's not really answering all the questions or resolving any of the issues that data teams that are facing day to day.
And so that's really how we're defining data ops observability. It's the set of best practices and tools that data teams need to deliver on data ops, right? And so it spans performance, cost, and quality. And with that, we want to ask the audience a question. What is your biggest data ops observability challenge? Is it cost governance? Is it optimization of your pipelines and applications? Or is it troubleshooting, you having visibility across your environment, or something else?
Interesting.
Cost governance is big, optimization. So all three, which is almost in equal portions, which is, I think, the whole point is that all three of those are really essential functions in order for data teams to implement data ops effectively. Thank you for that information, everyone. Awesome. So now what we really want to do is walk through 3 real-world customer examples of situations where we've seen companies struggling with each of those core issues. And the first one is a global transportation company. So Chris, love to hear your perspective on what you saw working with this particular company.
Yeah, sure. So a very large global logistical company. Early adopters of Databricks, right? So they've, their usage was, was on the higher end for, compared to some other folks. What's the challenge that they were facing when we came in was just, they froze the, how many more additional pipelines that they were going to be moving into their Databricks environment, primarily because of cost, right? Their costs were really exceeding expectations. In fact, they were running over budget, month over month, with no end in sight. The next thing you would think is, okay, well, if I understood where the cost overruns are going, or maybe some other ways where we can actually optimize for cost, they didn't have that, right? They did have some manual efforts of trying to do this, but really they struggled to control ongoing usage to really ensure maximum value. At the very end, they were really considering replatforming to an entirely new technology. So moving off of Databricks up to something else, because it really was that much of a pain point for this customer. And so I'll walk you through just a typical cloud journey with customers, just like this large logistical company, when they don't have a data observability platform. And so that phase 1 there is, I like to call the new platform excitement, right? Where maybe we've done a small use case or 2 or 3, and it looks like, price is looking good. The performance is there. And so we start to see customers start onboarding more and more workloads onto the environment. But there starts becoming a deviation between that blue line there, which is the number of use cases, and the consumption, which is what's ultimately what the customer's paying. It's generally when budgets start being allocated before hitting the budget before it actually starts, before the year or whatever the budgets were set, right? Where we actually start seeing a curtailing of use cases, which is outlined here on phase 2, where that blue line starts getting a little flatter, but that consumption continues to rise there. And so from here, it's really just all about just rising frustration with really the inability to predict spend accurately and really govern ongoing consumption based on business goals. And this is where we generally see this particular large logistical company in its phase. Last but not least, phase 3, really just starting to really question the value of the particular environment, and even start reconsidering replatforming. So that's a typical environment or the typical phase that we see companies face. And so I want to give you a typical experience, right? So the way that these guys were doing it today was they were using just reports, just like how everybody on this call has access to, right? So whether it's AWS, whether it's Azure, they have these hand-boxed reports. But the challenges with this is it's not granular enough. It's not real-time enough. If I wanted to understand why a particular user was spending up so much more than others, these type of reports don't cut it. Here, for this large logistical company, they were actually doing a lot of things from a very manual perspective. So had 2 full-time developers really trying to scrape the APIs that they were able to and try to get very granular so they can understand, which users were spending the most resources. But this was also a challenge too. 1, it was very manual, but then 2, it took, there could be changes that happened from the Databricks environment, and that could have broke this, right? So it really people started questioning, like, how accurate is this, right? So it just was not a sustainable solution. This is what was like with Unravel. So you've got that single pane of glass that gives you all the information about where spend is going. I can look at things from a user level perspective. I can even understand where to optimize things. But as you can see here, this is something that comes out of the box, right? So having this ability to really understand where cost is going really helps help this company really understand which conversations do we need to have in terms of over allocating resources, which ultimately come up to spend, and it really helped them control costs altogether. So that way they were happy to be on Databricks even to this day. Oh, and revisiting the phases, this is the approach or the phases that we had seen with this particular customer, right? So, we don't see that slump, and in fact, the consumption continues to rise. And so very, very happy customer. And the reason why it continues to rise is because they do feel happy that they are getting their return on investment with Databricks in this scenario.
So, Chris, would you say that the key there that enabled the customer to be able to resume scaling with more use cases is that they felt like they had clear visibility so they could predict what their spend was going to be and budget accordingly, and then they were able to have budget controls and be able to manage the spend so that they were sure that they were spending the money they wanted to spend on mission critical kinds of jobs, and yet controlling the costs around jobs that were less mission critical, so they could be ensured that they were getting the ROI that they were looking for, that delivered the real value to them, which is the reason that they were doing this in the first place. Absolutely.
I mean, another way to think about this is, the company will, doesn't mind spending money on technology that actually gives them the competitive advantage, right? And they were ultimately fighting this perception of this is just, wasted cost to, wow, I actually do feel that I'm actually getting the performance and reliability that I was originally promised from the environment, because we were able to understand where some of the inefficiencies on the code level or the application or the user behavior level really gave them the confidence to say, hey, this is actually working for us. So let's continue to onboard more use cases.
Awesome. Great. Well, let's shift gears then into the next use case, which is a large retail company who was struggling, in this case, with performance. So Chris, you want to share the insights?
Absolutely. So a global team, large global retail chain. This particular example was just really just understanding their pipelines. Now they had very critical pipelines, pipelines that reported up or that were used for executive dashboards and reporting, that were very critical, that they had the most up-to-date information, because very critical businesses decisions were going to be made off of what the reports entailed here. And so they had many folks, just babysitting these pipelines, a few, more critical than others, spending their weekends trying to make sure that this thing ran. If it did, fail right before, the Monday morning, all hands on deck, making sure that this thing would actually, complete successfully. So not a good way to live, but that was the status quo. Again, the common tools that they were using before Unravel became in the picture is they were using general DevOps tools out here, like what you're seeing on the screen here, like Grafana, right? The challenge with this tool is it's not really speaking term or the vocabulary that data teams are expecting, right? So these type of dashboards, while helpful, are really only answering 10, 20% of the questions that data ops teams would be asking. And here's another example of an orchestration tool called Airflow, which is really just a job scheduler. And so they were using this very heavily. And while, again, a very, very great tool in its own right, it's not end to end. And so when things fail, what you'd see on this particular screen is it would say, hey, this step had failed. But to understand why it failed or what were some things that we could do to actually resolve it, that was missing here. And so this is the reason why support teams would spend hours and sometimes days trying to understand why.
All right, cost, which is really that first use case that we talked about. There's only 3 votes in, so small sample. All right, let's move on. Okay, this is the third challenge we really wanted to talk about, which is a large financial institution. I think with this one, Chris, we're going to hone in on optimizing applications, and that those insights and recommendations that we just talked about for troubleshooting. I think they're probably even more important here for data engineers to be able to self-service a lot of that information and not have to rely on having data ops expertise available at the level that they really need. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, and you can describe how things in this company.
So there's a very, very large financial organization, with headquarters in the UK. Again, just really to sum this up, they have a lot of application developers that are new to the platform. For the developers on the call here, maybe used to seeing something like this, which is a Spark UI. And I love showing this because if I'm coming in as like a business analyst and someone tells me, hey, Spark UI is the greatest and it can tell you exactly what you want, you would look at this and say, this is jargon. I don't understand what this is. And it's probably because this was meant and created by engineers to talk about the inner workings of Spark. But if you don't know how to read this, that becomes challenging to really find some usage on this. There are other tools out there that could provide some level of insight and recommendations. So what you're seeing here is a product called Spark Lens. And again, it's very, very engineering specific. Doing this from a command line is, obviously always going to be a learning curve. But last but not least, it's going to give you just like high level, hey, this is what we think. You can provide some level of efficiency gains. And so, it's still up to the user to go ahead and throw it in there, try it again, and do the whole trial and error to truly prove out if that actually did anything. So, while it's a good tool, again, it's very developer or engineering centric. This is the same experience from within Unravel, right? So being able to provide all this information here in one screen. This particular case, we noticed that, again, this is being single threaded. Most of the work was spent on the driver of this particular application. This is where we start showing things such as like where the breakdown of time is across the various stages of this particular code. One thing that we do notice here is there are some skew that's highlighted here in the red. But more importantly, here at the bottom, you can actually just visually see that most of the time here was spent just waiting for resources or waiting for the data to come in. Or we've got a lot of shuffle time and for both on the read and write. So for a developer, trying to find these level of insights, again, it can take hours to do this. And even that would also mean that the developer knows exactly where to go. Here, what we're showing here in this particular case for this large financial organization, this really promoted them to be self-service, right? So they could go in and really understand, okay, what's my next step that I need to do? In this particular case, they needed to fix their SQL query. And so it's these level of insights, again, that really speed up that time to resolution. But more importantly, it's helping the developers really understand what's important for them. And that's optimizing their data apps. So that way they're able to meet the SLAs for, for the businesses that they work for.
So that is the end of our 3 examples. I hope they were useful. At Unravel, we focus on really helping data teams be successful in doing their jobs. That's really what we view as our purpose. And that's fundamentally, again, what we're calling DataOps Observability, which is the performance, the cost, and the quality all brought together under one platform that enables data teams to deliver on data ops for their organizations. And really our goal with that is to help data ops or data team members spend less time firefighting and doing toilsome work that not only just isn't fun, but isn't really delivering the kind of value and enabling those engineers to kind of solve the problems that they really want and need to be able to solve to really deliver on that promise of data where we started our presentation, that all the innovation that data can possibly represent can only come to life with data teams being able to operate effectively. So with that, would love to see if there are any questions that we can answer. I don't know if there are, Sarah, or not, but if there are, we'd be happy to address them. I'm also not sure if we're out of time.
Okay. I think we're good with the questions.
All right. Well, thank you so very much, everyone, for attending.
Thank you, folks.